Wonderful. Well, it just so happens this past Thursday, at our Fire Pit Thursday, that's a quick plug by the way, they teach that in Vicar School, try and mention other things that happen in the church life during the sermon, just to create momentum. And anyway, so our Fire Pit Thursday, which happens every Thursday by the way on the church paddock, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m, I was talking to a few people about something that I was asked to do when I was a trainee vicar in London. And I thought it was so embarrassing, I'll be honest folks, that I thought, look, they're going to start spreading this around the church, so I might as well get ahead of it and use it in a sermon. And that way I've kind of got the power. Do you understand that? Yeah, anyway. So I was asked as a trainee vicar, I was a year into my training, and we got moved to a placement in southwest London, just near Clapham, in a place called Balham, actually. And my boss, the vicar, Marcus, told me, which I thought, I must confess to you, I thought was a practical joke. He said to me, George, for the first 2 weeks of your training here, you're going to be becoming a level 2 gym instructor. Now, I wouldn't think you're rude if you look at me and think you're not someone that strikes us as a natural athlete. You'd be right. I'm not. Far from it. I'm not a natural athlete. I thought this was a joke, and yet I started this placement, and lo and behold, Marcus says, brilliant. We're going to get to the gym in central London, just by Tottenham Court Road, the big YMCA training gym there, and we're going to, from 9 to 5 for 2 weeks, be learning this course. We'll take exams at the end, and we're going to become gym instructors. Why would they do that, I hear you ask? That's a good question. I still don't really know. But they got some money to run a kind of a outreach project to do with spin cycling. We were going to call it SoulFit. I know, right, there you go. It wasn't my idea. I'm going to say that again for the record, on the tape. Wasn't my idea. But they had some money to do this stuff. And the way that you could get insurance to run this project is that you had to be a gym instructor. And so I faithfully went in my Umbro shorts that I had from secondary school, and a pair of Reebok Ultras, and my tie-dye t-shirt with neon headband, and faithfully over these 2 weeks tried my best to learn to become a gym instructor. I had to learn, folks, to give people workouts that I couldn't complete myself. And that's embarrassing. And so I got to the end of this thing, and I spent these 2 weeks learning about different CV workouts and resistance machines and weights and different kinds of stretching. And at the end, I had to sit a theory exam and then give a personal training session to a mate of mine, which was watched by the examiners. And I passed, which is miraculous, But I want to let you in on something this morning which you may not know. It turns out that having a gym instructor qualification doesn't automatically make you fit. It turns out, I couldn't believe it, I'm totally bemused at this. It turns out you have to actually do the stuff if you want to get fit. You can know everything there is to know about treadmills and CrossFit machines and whatever other machines I've forgotten now, it's a while ago, but whatever other machines there are. But if you don't actually get on them, you're not going to get any fitter. You know, having all the knowledge is no guarantee that you're going to get healthier. And honestly, it's the same with the church. It's the same with Christianity. You can know lots of things about God, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know God. You can know all kinds of things about ecclesiastical buildings, as beautiful as they are. You can know all sorts of things about services and liturgies, but without Jesus, without a relationship with him, it's all meaningless. You know, so often we can forget what's at the heart of it all, can't we? We come to church sometimes and we tick the boxes and we go through various religious rituals, and we can forget that at the heart of all of this, at the heart of baptisms and weddings and getting together on Sunday mornings, at the heart of Scripture, of all these practices we have, is that there is a God in heaven who loves us and is longing to know us, who sent his Son that we might be called into his family and know life in all of its fullness. And our story today, the story that Rhoda just read to us, in some ways is about a man who knew lots of stuff, but perhaps had missed the point a little bit. This man, Nicodemus. And it's this beautiful story as well, just in case you think I'm being unkind, because he starts off as someone who knows lots of stuff, but doesn't really get the point. But throughout John's gospel, this biography, this story of Jesus' life, we see Nicodemus pop up time and time again. What we had read to us this morning is the first time that he's introduced to us as a character, but we see him halfway through John's gospel, and then by the end, he's one of the people with Joseph Arimathea who's taking Jesus off the cross and burying him. He becomes actively involved. in Jesus' kingdom movement. In other words, he goes from someone that when it comes to faith and when it comes to God, he moves from someone who's intrigued to someone who is actively involved, actively engaged in a relationship with God. And so what do we know? Let's do a little bit of context here. The vicar's lost his Bible. Nightmare. Wait a sec. Let's do a little bit of context here. So what do we know? If you've got your Bibles open in front of you, feel free to flick. It's not necessary, but if you want to, do that to John chapter 3, this story that we've just read. So we pick up a few things. The first and most obvious is in this story is that the man's name is Nicodemus. His name's Nicodemus, and we're told that he is a ruler of the Jews. In other words, he was someone of status. He was a religious expert. He was part of the council that was called the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling council of the Jews. In other words, Nicodemus wasn't someone who was on the margins of society. He was someone who was respected, someone who was known. He was one of life's winners. In fact, his name, Nicodemus, literally means in Greek, Nico, which comes from the word Nike, which means victory, and Demos, which comes from the word demo, which means people. He's literally one of the victorious people. He's one of life's winners. It's written into his name. And yet, despite being a Pharisee, despite being part of this group that, to be honest, actively opposed Jesus for most of his life, the group that end up putting Jesus and being involved in the plot to put Jesus to death, despite being a Pharisee, something grabs Nicodemus' heart about this Jesus person. He doesn't quite understand it. He doesn't quite get why he's so intrigued, but he is. And so he comes to Jesus in the night. Maybe you've experienced something of that. You're not quite sure why. You've got so many doubts about God. You've got so many questions about whether this is all real. But still, if you're really honest with yourself, you might not say this to your mates, but if you're honest, there's still this niggling of I wonder if there's something there, though. I wonder if there's more to faith than what I think. And so we know this guy's Nicodemus. We know he's a ruler among the Jews. And the other thing we know from this passage is that he comes to Jesus in the middle of the night. Night in this biography of Jesus' life, light and dark are used as metaphors a lot. And nighttime often represents sin and evil and spiritual darkness. Perhaps one of the reasons it might be said as well that Nicodemus came in night is because he didn't want to be seen to be associating with Jesus. After all, he was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were writing Jesus off. They were doing their own PR campaign not to listen to this guy. So what would it mean for Nicodemus to be seen with him? And so scared as he is, fearful as he is of what other people might think, he comes to Jesus in the night because he wants to be hidden. And he starts having this conversation with Jesus, which goes a little bit like this. Jesus, you've been doing some crazy stuff. Stuff that I can't explain. You've got to tell me, who are you really? That's the question on Nicodemus' heart when he speaks to Jesus. What he really wants to know is who are you? Who are you actually? I didn't grow up around Christianity, and if you're anything like I didn't grow up a Christian around religion, if you're anything like me, you're aware of some of the decoration of church, right? Maybe you go to church on Easter, maybe you go to church at Christmas, maybe you're aware that there's a church on your street, or that there are cathedrals in cities. You're surrounded by the stuff of church. Maybe you've got some opinions on Jesus even. Maybe you think he was just a great spiritual teacher. Maybe you don't think he existed at all. But I believe that within all of us, there's probably a question, particularly as people who grow up in England, around some of the stuff of church. I think there's a question for each of us, which is, who is Jesus really? When I scratch the surface, when I get below all of that stuff and Easter bunnies and Santa and all of that kind of cultural stuff, is there actually something to this? This is the same question that Nicodemus is asking. And so Jesus begins to answer. And he begins to give this answer all about being reborn. Now, how many of you have heard people use the expression, I'm a born-again Christian? Have you heard that expression? Right? This is where it comes from, by the way, John chapter 3. A born-again Christian, someone who has come to faith in Jesus. It's that kind of Christian lingo where, to be honest with you, like Nicodemus, I find it a bit confusing. I remember when I first became a Christian, and unlike Nicodemus, who knew all the stuff but maybe didn't really get the point, I didn't know anything. And so I basically was invited along by a friend to a church thing, and I ended up having this amazing encounter with Jesus. But I didn't own a Bible, and I didn't know any of the songs, and I didn't know any of the rules. I was clueless. And so I began to go to church after I had sort of encountered Jesus, and people began saying to me, "Oh, George, are you born again?" I don't know. Was there a ritual I was supposed to be a part of? Was there like an assault course or a rite of passage? What do you mean born again? And then I got to church and I joined the church worship team. I started playing guitar, and people told me that, "Oh, well, George, really, that's a praise song." And then there were ministry songs, there were worship songs, which all sounded exactly the same to me, by the way. Didn't know the difference in any of them. People would begin to talk about preaching the gospel. I'll be honest with you guys, I didn't know what the word gospel even meant. And so I'd go up to these pastors and say, "Please tell me, what is preaching the gospel? Am I missing out? Is it different from what all of the other blokes and women that I've been listening to at the front of church?" And people would say, "Oh, yeah, well, you've got preaching the gospel, and then you've got preaching itself, and then you've got teaching, and then you've got sharing, and then you've got a contemplation, and then you've got a reflection." What? It all just sounds to me like a bunch of people at the front of church talking about Jesus. It seems the same thing to me. And then I remember people asking me, "Oh, George, are you accountable to anyone?" You might be asking that yourself. Are you okay? It's a joke. Oh, it's a joke. The bishop. As a new Christian, as a teenager, I thought they meant, did I have a bank account? Well, I'm very confused why Christians would be interested in whether I had a bank account. Was I accountable to anyone? And then one day, the elders of the church were mentioned, the eldership. I never heard this word eldership. And I suddenly thought of like a mix between the Jedi Council and like a Simpsons episode I had once watched. But bit by bit, I began to understand that this language, these words, were actually explaining some of the stuff that I had experienced. I just didn't have the language for it yet, right? And born again is one of these terms. Being born again was really what I had experienced, which was that I didn't want to live life my way anymore. I didn't want to go about living life, just my way, doing the things that I thought were good. I wanted to live life Jesus' way. And that's what being born again, by the way, is about. It's about dying to ourselves, stopping striving and trying to do life our way, and instead doing life God's way. And that's what we've experienced this morning in baptism, by the way. Baptism is nothing less than that. The symbolism of going down into the water, of being covered with the water, is death to living life our way. As you come up, it's life. It's coming alive to Jesus. Coming alive to God. It's life in all of its fullness. A life full of joy and purpose. I've got to tell you now, it is amazing. It's not just spiritual stuff. It's real life we're talking about here. This isn't just a nice feeling that goes away when you go home after a Sunday service. This is the life that each of us was made to live. This is what it is to be truly human. To know God. You can know joy even when you're in the middle of suffering. You can know peace in your life when there is absolutely no reason to feel peaceful, when life is completely chaotic. You can know that you are held by God when you feel lost in the world. It is a life that is beyond description. This is the original way. Living with God, being in relationship with Him. This is what life was supposed to be, by the way. This was the original design. Every other way of living is the sub-kingdom. So often when we think it's the other way around, we think, well, you've got normal life where you sort of just, you crack on, and then some eccentric, slightly strange people do this faith thing. It's not true. It's the other way around. What's really real is God. What's really real is living life God's way, and everything else is just a diversion from that. The point is that when we come to know Jesus, it's like life goes from black and white to colour. Have any of you experienced that? Just me, okay. So why do we need to die to living life our way? You might say, well, life's pretty good. If that's what baptism's really about, if that's what Jesus is saying, I need to be born again, why would I want to be reborn? Why would I want this new life? We said this earlier in the service, but I'll tell you through my story, and if you relate, wonderful, that's great. But the truth is that even with amazing things in my life, before I was a Christian, I knew that there was something within me that didn't quite get filled up. There was a hole. You know, I could be in a great place with my family. I could have amazing relationships. I could know real joy. I could be doing stuff that I love. But sometimes when my head still hit the pillow at night, there was this like void, this sense of like, surely there's more to life than this. There was a hole that I know needed filling. You know, isn't it, I mean, I was going to say fascinating. It's harrowing, really, isn't it? We're one of the most advanced societies in the world. I mean, we're one of the most advanced civilizations in history. And yet we're still so chronically anxious, many of us. I know I struggled with that. Often we can still feel alone. For all of our technology, for all of our progress, we can still feel spiritually dead. We can still feel this hole within us. You know, many of you would have seen this in the news, but do you know in this country we have a minister for loneliness? That's how bad this problem is. We have a mental health epidemic. You know, we told ourselves in modernity that if as a society we just got rid of these old-fashioned ideas like God, then everything would get better, right? Oh, religion, God, Jesus. I mean, that's all antiquated. We get rid of all of that stuff and then life will start to flourish. But guys, the data's in. The experiment's failed. It's not true. It turns out in our world today, in our lives, we got rid of God and we're just as divided. We experience just as much suffering. We experience just as much loneliness. He hasn't answered the yearning deep within our hearts. You know, we've got more freedom than we've ever had in history. And yet many of us don't, in a deep sense, feel free, but locked up. In fact, as an aside, most of the things that we call freedom, by the way, in society, the Bible calls slavery. The freedom just to pursue any pleasure that we want. It's not freedom at all. By the way, if you don't know what I've been talking about over the last couple of minutes, then just honestly switch off. I won't be offended. Go to sleep, start texting someone, start thinking about lunch. Seriously. But if you do relate, if you actually know, you know what? If I'm being honest with myself, I do wonder if there's more to life than what I'm experiencing. I do wonder if really there is a deeper purpose, that life is more than me just existing day to day. If you do experience sort of a longing sort of within your heart and within your soul for something more, then you're on the right track. And if you don't experience any of that, then I've got nothing to offer you this morning. There is an answer, and it's the same answer that Jesus gives to Nicodemus. Jesus says all this stuff, doesn't he, about being born again, about being born of water and spirit, of a birth from above, of living a new life. And Nicodemus, I love this, by the way, about the Bible. Often the characters say the thing that we're thinking. And Nicodemus says, how? What are you might be thinking this right now. What are you talking about? How is any of this possible? How do I enter into this? How can I have this new life that you're banging on about? Well, folks, it is simple. It's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. You just come to Jesus. You come to Jesus. This is what we see. This is what we see in response to Nicodemus' question. Probably the most famous verse in the whole Bible, John 3:16. In answer to this response, how do I have this new life? Jesus says, amongst other things, he says this, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever should believe in him, though they will die, will not perish, but have eternal life. God didn't send his son in the world to condemn the world or judge the world. He's not mad at you. He sent him in the world because he loves you and he wants to know you. How can you have this life? Come to Jesus. You know, for Nicodemus, a Jewish leader, this is like revolutionary, by the way. Because Jewish people were told that to say yes to God is all about keeping the law. And suddenly Jesus is saying, no, that's not true anymore. Saying yes to God is about coming to me, putting your trust in me, putting your life in my hands. But you know what the good news is about this? The good news is that you can know nothing about religion. You can be a total novice. You can be a complete beginner. You could have never stepped into a church building in your life, and you're still welcome at Jesus' table. You can be like me. You can know none of the lingo, And yet you can give your life into Jesus' hands because the requirement is simply faith. It's not about trying harder. It's not about earning something. It's simply about surrendering your life to him. And conversely, by the way, this is really important. You can have 6 PhDs in theology. You can know everything that there is to know about the church and its protocols. But without Jesus, it's empty. It doesn't mean you're born again. Jesus is after our hearts. It says this in an Old Testament book called Ezekiel. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. And from all of your uncleanliness, and from all of your idols I will cleanse you. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. You know, I'm coming into land now, I promise. There's my watch on the table. I'm not going to go on much longer. But coming back to that gym story, who do you think's better off? The level 2 gym instructor you see before you, who doesn't run, if I'm honest. Or the person who just gets outside and runs. So it is with the kingdom of God. Anyone, any moment can be the moment of your salvation. Any moment can be the moment that you say yes to Jesus. No matter who you are or what you've done or what your background is, you can place your life into his hands. You know, maybe you're brand new to church. You're wondering what this is all about. Here it is. There is a God in heaven who loves you with an eternal, everlasting, unconditional love. He loves you so much. You were made to know him. You were designed to know him. And it's not just a sentimental love that makes you feel good and nice. It's a love that made him send himself in human form to die for you, to suffer for you so that you can know him and that you can know joy and peace and life in all of its fullness. He did all that so that you would know that death isn't the end, that there's no way you can go, there's no distance you can run from him, that he can't forgive, by the way. He's so full of mercy. He loves you. God so loved the world that he sent his son. Maybe you need to hear that this morning. Or maybe you're like Nicodemus. Maybe you've been intrigued by Jesus. Maybe you've been interested in the past and you're sort of on the fence. You're like, I don't know where to put my... And you just feel God stirring you this morning. You know that it's time to just put your chips in on Jesus. You know, Nicodemus, it took him a long time, by the way. And that's okay. He goes from being interested to a bit more intrigued. It's only right at the end of the story where he actually gets involved with Jesus. But I think there's so many things that can keep us from this. I think Nicodemus gives us a picture of this as well, this story. I think there are barriers, aren't there, for us coming to Jesus. Maybe it's fear, like him coming in the night. What will other people think if I was to go all in for him? Maybe it's pride, right? I don't need Jesus. I'm fine on my own. You know, if you've lived life that way, you've never made a mistake and you've been perfectly satisfied, you'll be the first person in history. Come talk to me afterwards. I'd love to take a picture with you. Or maybe it's the final thing. Maybe it's control. You know, maybe you like having an intellectual kind of understanding of God. Maybe you like having a head knowledge about Jesus, but it's just a bit scary, honestly. Like, what will it mean if I really invite him in? What will it mean for my life? What will it mean for my family? We can come to Jesus today. This is what I want you to hear. As we are. And he, in his mercy and love, meets us in that place.